Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this program today, we'll be asking, is it time to rethink the two-state solution to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Well, welcome to the programme, and today's special guest is all the way from North London. His name is Gary Mond, and he is the chairman of the advisory board of the National Jewish Assembly. Gary, warm welcome to the programme.
Thank you for having me.
That's a pleasure. Can you share with our viewers your kind of extraordinary background and history, particularly as it relates to your father and your grandfather? The fact that your grandfather was saved by Oscar Schindler is incredible.
That's absolutely right. My father's Polish, my grandfather was Polish. They lived in Krakow. In 1938, my grandfather decided that there was already a lot of anti-Semitism in Poland. Never mind Hitler, he hadn't invaded yet. There was already a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism. And he decided, because my father was doing well at school, that he would get him to finish his education in the UK. And he was sent to a boarding school at Brighton College, which was in Hove on the south coast. And that was in 1938. And summer of 1939, he takes exams. And goes back to Poland for the summer holidays, and a letter comes to his father, my grandfather, saying that he had to take 6 exams and he passed 5 of them but failed 1. And normally they don't invite boys back if they fail an exam, but as his failure was very narrow, he was invited back, but he had to come back to school early. The term began in early September 1939. He had to do a resit on the 30th of August 1939. That meant that he arrived back in the UK in late August 39. The Nazis invaded Poland on the 1st of September. If not for that resit, he would not be alive, he would not have survived, and I wouldn't be sitting here today. And my grandfather was still in Poland, of course, with the rest of my father's family. Unfortunately, the vast majority of them perished. My father lost his mother, his 2 sisters, numerous aunts, uncles, cousins. The only survivor, or one of 2 survivors actually, was his own father, who survived because of Oscar Schindler. He was on the 1,150 Jews who were saved by Schindler from the Nazis, and he worked in the Plaszow factory. And if you go to the Plaszow factory today, you will find the name of David Mond on the plaque that commemorates the 1,150 or so Jews who were saved by Schindler. He had another surviving relative, was his first cousin, who made Aliyah, and now lives in Israel. Well, he's passed away now, but he and his family all live in Israel.
Amazing. Can you share a bit more about your grandfather then, David Mond? What kind of man was he, and obviously very appreciative of what Oscar Schindler did. And of course we have the famous film that was produced by Steven Spielberg about the Holocaust, and it just gives that excellent prism and just awakened a whole entire generation up to the horrors of the Holocaust.
Well, before the war, he was in the jewellery business. My father then was in the diamond business in London after the war. But he was very much a family man, and was living a good life in Krakow with his family, and in an area not far from Wawel Castle in Krakow, for those people who know Krakow. And he then, after the war, because he survived, he married another Holocaust survivor who had a daughter who had also survived. And the 3 of them tried to make a life again in Poland after the Second World War. And for 2 or 3 years, it was okay. And then in 1949, the communists really got a grip on Poland, and they were very anti-Semitic. And they tried to arrest my grandfather because he was a bourgeoisie capitalist, but he wasn't at home. So instead, they arrested his new wife. What happened next was his new wife's daughter, who is my auntie Shoshana, she's 98 years old, lives in Beersheba to this day. At that time, she was in her 20s, and she kicked up a real fuss because she just happened to be chairman of the local Marxists. And she went to the special agency to get her mother out of jail. And she succeeded, incredibly. It was almost never happened. If you're arrested, you're never seen again with the communists. This is in 1949. And that night they left, the three of them left for Israel.
Amazing.
They went through Europe and left for Israel that night.
So let's remind ourselves of that incredible film, Schindler's List. And this is an interview with one of the survivors that Oscar Schindler helped to save. Very much the same kind of story as Gary's grandfather, David Mond.
At the end of Schindler's List, made in 1993, the survivors placed stones of remembrance on his grave in Jerusalem. Today, Eva Ratz is one of those survivors. As a young child in 1945, she was number 201 on Schindler's List. Her mother, Fela, was number 202.
Every time I come here, I am very moved, really, because he's my survivor. They ask me in Poland, how did you survive the Holocaust? I say, first of all, the Almighty God. Second, my mother. And third, of course, Oscar Schindler.
Ratz addressed Christian leaders at the gravesite.
I loved Mr. Schindler, her director. All of us loved him. An angel of mercy, really. We knew exactly what he's doing and how difficult it is to do it.
Ratz later told the group about surviving the Holocaust and life in the camp before she met Schindler.
The Germans were terrible. 25 lashes on the behind was every day. They hang people in the Appelplatz every 2 days, with no reason. I think that Hitler and the Nazism really convinced them that really they are not human.
These Christian leaders came as part of a seminar hosted by Yad Vashem and the Museum of the Bible. Yad Vashem here in Jerusalem is dedicated to preserving the memory of the Holocaust for future generations. It's also committed to educate this present generation about the dangers of anti-Semitism and remaining silent in the face of evil.
We think about the Holocaust, the church was silent. We don't have to be silent today.
Susanna Kokkonen leads the seminar for Christian leaders.
This seminar is for Christian leaders to learn about anti-Semitism, the Holocaust, and Israel today. When we think about anti-Semitism, we used to think about it in the past, but now in the past few years we have seen how much it's rising all over the world. So we understand that suddenly this topic is very urgent, and it's really important for church leaders to understand what's happening.
The 10-day seminar had a deep impact on the visiting Christian leaders.
I would say this seminar has been a life-changing experience. It has been a stretch spiritually, intellectually, emotionally. It has really impacted my view of the history of the Jewish people. To be here in the land, to meet the people, to meet the survivors, it's been quite a moving experience.
Pastor Josh Phillips plans to take home a new passion.
A love for Israel and the Jewish people that I didn't know I had, I didn't know I needed, but a desire to be a partner and an advocate for Israel, for the Jewish people.
Yet Kokkonen believes much of the church is still silent.
I see the silence of the church. We are silent about anti-Semitism. Most of us don't really feel that it touches us. We might say that it's awful, it's terrible, it's wrong, but we don't need to take any concrete steps. And that same conspiracy of silence also exists with regard to persecution of the Christians.
Today we're in the same boat, Christians and Jews. More Christians are being murdered every day than Jews throughout the Middle East and other places. We need each other. There is a clash of civilizations.
Yad Vashem's Ephraim K. sees world events forging a bond between Jews and Christians.
We both have to work together because this is something that affects us all. And we have to know what the dangers are in fundamentalist, radical, extremist Islam. Evil cannot be overlooked, especially after the Holocaust.
And he sees the value of these seminars.
When we come in contact with these evangelical pastors, it gives us hope. Israelis as Jews living here in the Middle East, we're in a tough neighborhood. It's not easy, but they give us a lot of support, a lot of optimism, which is important. And they embrace us and we embrace them. It couldn't be better.
Ratz agrees.
I want that everyone will know what Schindler was. Schindler was not a Jew, he was a Christian, and I'm sure that many Christians, maybe they will do the same. I believe in the Christians.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Yad Vashem, Jerusalem.
And we're so pleased and with the work being done by Yad Vashem to keep the memory of the Holocaust alive and to honour the victims of the Holocaust. Gary, can you share with us pretty much your life growing up in the Jewish community in the UK? What was that like, and when did you first become involved in Israel and standing up for the Jewish state?
My life in northwest London was that of, I think, probably a fairly typical Jewish boy. I went initially to a Jewish school, Matilda Marks Kennedy, which still exists, and then to the local Cheder, which is where, if you go to a non-Jewish school, you have Sunday education in Ivrit. So when I left Matilda Marks Kennedy and went to another school that wasn't a Jewish school, my parents sent me to the Cheder at Kinloss Gardens and Finchley Synagogue. After that, I wasn't very involved with the Jewish community for much of my teenage years because I was an international swimmer. All my time was spent swimming, and I ended up swimming for England on butterfly. So my teenage years, I wasn't really part of any of the youth groups. My involvement in the Jewish community took off when I was much older, actually, probably from about 2007, when already by then I was in my late 40s. It started when I had been involved in the Conservative Party, by the way. I was twice a parliamentary candidate and spent 6 years on Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea Council. Well, that didn't involve me in the Jewish community. But then in 2007, I met a friend who's actually now is Lord Harrington, and he invited me to join the board of the Conservative Friends of Israel. And that was my first step into the world of Jewish politics, although it was really only a very small step. Conservative Friends of Israel does fantastic work in essentially explaining Israel and its point of view to the non-Jewish community, and particularly to the parliamentarians and other politicians. And I was on the advisory board. I still am to this day on the advisory board of the Conservative Friends of Israel. In 2011, the next step was when I met a man called Samuel Hayek, who is the chairman of the Jewish National Fund, UK. And he invited me to become a trustee of the JNF. And I've only just last month stepped down after a 12-year service as a trustee of JNF UK. And that exposed me to the work that the JNF was doing in Israel, which is absolutely laudable. What they do is that they invest monies in projects that are going to help ordinary Israeli people, particularly in the poorer areas, some of the poorer areas like the Negev. And these projects might be schools, hospitals, nursing homes, community centres, even the occasional theatre, often partnering with either the Israeli government or with local municipal authorities and with private donors. And we actually are changing the lives for the better of so many poorer Israelis. And that's something I've been very, very proud of for the last 12 years.
Of course, the JNF stands for the Jewish National Fund.
Indeed.
And it is famous for, is it in the 1920s, having a tin?
Yes,
having
they
Jewish
still
homes.
exist.
And to build trees in Israel.
Well, trees was what everyone knows it for.
Yeah.
And I think that was probably fairly true for much of the 20th century. But then as the JNF was successful in raising money, often from legacies, it started to invest in infrastructure. You know, I often said to my fellow trustees, you've got to think of describing the JNF in 2 words, 20 words, 200 words, or 2,000 words. The 2-word description is Israeli infrastructure. And that is something that we're very, very proud of. I have to say we are, but I've just simply stepped down as a trustee, but nevertheless, I'm still very much part of the JNF.
Oh, wonderful. How would you describe your experience being involved with the Board of Deputies? And for our viewers watching that don't know the Board of Deputies, it's effectively the communal organisation that represents the Jewish community on behalf of the British government. Is that right?
Yes, well, I joined the Board of Deputies because in 2011, when I joined the JNF, there was a vacancy for the JNF representative on the Board of Deputies. When I got there and started to attend meetings, I was not best pleased with what I saw. I felt that many of the deputies were against the state of Israel. I remember in my very first meeting, there was a prominent member of the Board of Deputies who was talking about Jews poisoning Palestinian wells. and they're speaking about the so-called settler community as if they were the cause of all problems for Israel. I felt very much that it was leaning to the political left, and I spent 10 years essentially trying to change matters, and doing so by building up a group of people who felt the same way I did, and getting that group to grow. And over the 10-year period, I sort of rose through the ranks of the Board of Deputies to become, in May 2021, its Senior Vice President, which is number 2 only to the President. However, then the problems began because I essentially wasn't welcome in a community that was essentially very left-leaning. The first big problem was when one of my fellow trustees at the JNF had said that immigration is a subject that needed to be spoken about and debated. And I, being the JNF representative, was turned on and said, you have to condemn this. I refused, categorically refused. And then what happened was that there was a move to censure the trustees of the JNF, that's 11 people, many of whom they didn't actually know, the Board of Deputies didn't actually know many of these people, to censure us for not condemning the trustee who had spoken about immigration. It was completely nonsensical. The idea the Board of Deputies should censure probably one of the most famous and successful Jewish charities there are, one of the, in terms of raising money, in the Jewish community, was absolutely damnable. And that was the beginning of my problems. And in fact, that would have been it when they had a resolution on it. Before that happened, however, they also started to dug in my Facebook accounts and found that I'd criticised Islam at some point in the past, which I did so. In particular, I don't know if you remember the Bataclan massacre of 2015,
of course, yeah. Oh, well, yeah.
When about 150 people were murdered in Paris by 3 Islamic terrorists. And I was criticised for condemning them and saying that we're effectively at war with Islam. Well, maybe I should have said fundamentalist Islam or Islamists, but those terms weren't so much used in 2015. And so I actually said that this is putting the civilized communities of the world effectively at war with Islam, which in a sense it was. This led to my fellow officers saying that they had no confidence in working with me anymore. Although I'd made the tweet 6 years earlier, and not tweet, the Facebook post. But the decisive issue was the way that they were wishing to censure the JNF, which I thought brought the board into total disrepute. And I was horrified to find out, by then I'd resigned, and a week or 2 weeks later, they did actually censure the JNF. 133 deputies from the Board of Deputies censured 11 trustees of the JNF, hard-working people, more than half of them they didn't even know they were, simply because these 11 people refused to condemn a fellow trustee who had said that immigration needed to be discussed. Utterly damnable, brought the board into disrepute, and in my view makes the board unfit to be an organisation to represent the Jewish community.
And there are big and deep divisions within the Jewish community, isn't there?
Yes.
Particularly when it comes to Israel, and of course your community is very much affected by the alarming rise of Jew hatred as well. So how much does the issue of Israel play within the eternal Jewish dynamics, particularly within these organisations? And particularly one of their mantra that we'll be unpacking a lot more throughout this programme is this concept of a two-state solution. Yes. It's almost like a mantra that can't be discussed, and they support this position without even looking into the strategic facts on the ground. And also the fact is it's up to the Israeli government and the Israeli people to decide whether they want a Palestinian state and to have a two-state solution rather than something being posed on Israel from foreign nations such as Britain, the EU or the United States.
Well, your last point is absolutely key. It's not just a question of trying to impose a two-state solution on Israel. It's also the entire issue is a matter for Israelis to discuss and to discuss with their neighbours. It is not a matter for British Jews to opine on as Jewish representatives. Of course, we'll all speak about our views around the Shabbat dinner table. That's understandable. And we'll probably, maybe as individuals, write letters to the papers. But what should not be happening is for organisations to be putting out a Jewish community view, which many Jews would not share, for a number of reasons. Firstly, because it's not represented, because there's such a wide variety of views. Secondly, it is patronising and insulting to the government of Israel to be lectured on by people in the diaspora, whether they're Jewish or not. You know, how would we feel if Benjamin Netanyahu announced a policy on Northern Ireland? He obviously wouldn't. But the point is, it's the same. Why should we be dictating to Jews in Israel what they should be doing, and Mr. Netanyahu not dictating to the British government what it should be doing about Northern Ireland?
Absolutely. And also we have a recent example of this, don't we, Gary, with Benjamin Netanyahu's recent visit to London, where he met our Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, and we had big demonstrations against him, not only from the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, but also members of the Jewish community here and Israelis living in exile here in this country, with effectively protesting his desire to reform Israel's judiciary.
The opinion of the National Jewish Assembly, which is the organisation I chair, which was formed in the aftermath of my leaving the Board of Deputies, just within 2 or 3 months of that happening, and it's now been going just on a year now, is that it is a matter for Israelis, the Israeli community who vote in Israel, to actually opine on this. It is not a matter for British Jews to opine on this, and certainly not for British Jewish communal organisations.
Absolutely.
And that's really the key that I have to say. It's not a matter for us to be opining on. Some of the reasons I gave earlier.
I mean, a few weeks ago we had your director, Steve Winston,
yes,
on the Middle East Report. Great guy, absolute pleasure to interview, and really unpacking your new organisation, which is called the National Jewish Assembly. Right. From your perspective, how did this organisation come about, and how does it meet a real need within your community to stand up for Israel, but also to confront this rising level of Jew hatred in this country?
Okay, I don't believe in astrology, but it came about because 2 completely unrelated matters aligned. The first was my experience of the Board of Deputies and having to leave. And at the same time, the Zionist Federation that Steve Winston and Dalia Hajiov, our events manager, were working for, ran out of money. So you had someone who was prepared to put a bit of money into getting a new organisation started, meeting up with 2 people who were losing their jobs and were very happy to be involved in a new organisation like the NJA. That was really how we came about. To the rest of your question, really, we look at 3 key principles. We want to be simplistic. We essentially want to support Israel, we wish to promote Jewish life, and we wish to fight anti-Semitism. And the way we're going about it, the long-term aim is to gain influence, political influence, but the short-term plan is to behave as if we are like a political party. We're not a charity. Behave as if we're like a political party. You know, if you want to join the Labour Party or the Conservative Party, how do you go about it? You pay them £30 or £25 or something like that. What happens after you've paid them? You get invited to a variety of meetings, speaker meetings, social meetings, campaigning meetings, maybe committee type meetings, and then maybe you get invited to debates on particular political issues. And then a year later, you're asked for another £30 or £25. That's exactly how we're operating the NJA. That means we become a grassroots organisation for ordinary Jews who have got no involvement with anything, or they may or may not have involvement, but not necessarily got an involvement with a synagogue or with any other Jewish community groups, and they can pay a small sum of money and join and be involved.
Excellent. And for our Christian viewers as well, if they want to get involved, are they welcome?
They are welcome, but we don't have very many, to be honest. It's 340 members right now, and there are a very, very small number of non-Jews. And they're certainly welcome to participate.
Fabulous. So that's great, and it's a great organisation. I'm very happy to endorse you. And of course, one thing so important, particularly now that the Zionist Federation has gone, that's one big Jewish advocacy organisation gone that was played a major part in helping to write the Balfour Declaration, known as the birth certificate of the modern state of Israel, and has played an incredible role in supporting Israel and the Jewish people for well over a century. So it's great to know that your new organisation is helping to fill those shoes.
Yes, well, legally I believe the ZF still exists, but as far as I'm aware, in terms of organising events, it's dormant. What we're doing now is combining people who believe in those three key principles with arranging for them to have appropriate meetings. Last night we had Sarah Dines, who's a government minister under Suella Braverman, talk to us about anti-Semitism and Home Office related issues and the online harms bill that's being planned at the moment, online safety bill, sorry. It's those, and then we frequently also have Israeli journalists, prominent Israeli politicians. So there's every opportunity for our members to meet people and to get their point of view across. Another issue, which is very much a grassroots issue, you may or may not be aware, there's a lot of controversy in the Jewish community regarding the new planned Holocaust memorial near Parliament.
Yes, I heard about
the community is divided, frankly. There are many good people, people I have the greatest of respect for, who are in favour of it. There are also some very good people who I also have a lot of respect for who are against it. And what we did, we organised a debate on it at the end of last October, and we had 115 people come and heard views on both sides. It's something that there is a role for a grassroots organisation to talk about and perhaps influence politicians on issues such as this.
Excellent. And Gary, what are the challenges facing the Jewish community? I mean, primarily because of your background, your influence, and the role that you played at the Board of Deputies, what you've done through the Jewish National Fund or the JNF, your work on kind of frontline politics as well with the Conservative Party, and now your investment with the National Jewish Assembly and involvement there, gives you a great perspective over the challenges facing the Jewish community. What would you say the biggest challenges facing the Jewish community?
By far the biggest challenge is the rise of anti-Semitism. People divided into right-wing anti-Semitism, left-wing anti-Semitism and Islamic anti-Semitism, all three of which need to be taken seriously. There are some who don't take Islamic anti-Semitism seriously because they're frightened it will upset interfaith initiatives, and that's very unfortunate. But essentially, we support groups. I'll give you another example of a very successful group who we got a lot of enthusiasm about. That's called the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism. I don't know if you've heard of it, the CAA. Yeah, they're doing fantastic work in bringing anti-Semites to justice and actually prosecuting, which others are not doing. And so we support any initiatives that can help fight anti-Semitism. And the way forward for us, as we start to gain influence, this will take a bit of time, but we start to gain influence, is to lobby government ministers and people who are in a position of influence to assist in this. This may mean legislation changes, or it may simply mean individual instances being brought to the public light. It will vary.
Yeah, I mean, you made the news last year for your donation to Liz Truss's political campaign when she was running to be the leader of the Conservative Party and then our Prime Minister. I mean, here was a British Prime Minister who was actually proposing to move the British Embassy from Tel Aviv, Herzliya, to Jerusalem, and showed her pro-Israel credentials. And it would have been such a breath of fresh air had she actually been achieved that and was given time to actually govern rather than being hounded out of an office. What is she like as a person, and what are your thoughts on the current Conservative leadership and its views on Israel and the Jewish community?
Well, starting with Liz Truss, I've only met her 2 or 3 times. I can't say that she's a close friend or anything. I have a good friend, a very good friend, who supported her, told me he was donating £10,000 and said to me, picked up the phone to me and said, will you match me? And what I'd read about Liz Truss pleased me. I thought she was the closest to my own political mindset since Margaret Thatcher. And so I was very happy to make a donation. I perceived Liz Truss as someone who instinctively believed in freedom of the individual and instinctively believed in cutting taxes and reducing the role of the state, which is very close to my heart politically. It's nothing to do with the NGA, of course. This is entirely my own private political views. Had she been allowed to carry on, I think the mistake that was made was one that not a lot of people emphasise, but this was the real mistake. I think that she should have spent more time talking about public spending cuts along with the tax cuts, because I think that if she'd done that, the markets would not have been quite so spooked. That's just my own private view. I think that more should have been spent about where cuts should be made in public spending, and in my case I particularly believe that there's a lot of waste in the overseas aid programme, and there are others too. So I think that was what was one of the key issues that led to her downfall. As regards the present leadership, I think Rishi Sunak is a supporter of Israel. I have no doubt about that, actually. And I think quite a number of his government are strong supporters of Israel. But we have to see where this goes. I mean, we had the tragic murders, as I'm sure you know, in the past week regarding the D family, Leah, Rina and Maya, who were murdered in Judea and Samaria by Palestinian terrorists. And they were, of course, British citizens as well. And the most recent statement from James Cleverly was fantastic. He actually came off the fence and totally condemned the terrorists. So that gives me cause for hope. However, my concern is what's going to happen next. What else can we do? I particularly want to see a campaign, and we're discussing this internally in the NGA, of trying to get the government to stop funding the Palestinian Authority. Firstly, and most importantly, because the Palestinian Authority spend a lot of money on the Pay for Slay campaign, which pays terrorists lucrative sums of money, and for the rest of their lives, if they actually kill Israelis, kill Jews. And that is obscene, utterly obscene. There are other problems as well with the Palestinian Authority, particularly on the education side, that they're actually breeding future generations of terrorists. There was an excellent set of articles written by the political editor of the Jewish Chronicle, David Rose, last year on the corruption of the Palestinian Authority and the torture techniques that it uses on its own population. So I think it will be a great campaign, and we're talking about it now, getting it underway soon, to try to lobby the government to stop funding the Palestinian Authority.
Absolutely. I mean, very much like the Trump administration did, which actually then brought about kind of peace in the Middle East through the Abraham Accords, because the mantra before was that only by making peace with the Palestinian Authority could Israel make peace with the Arab world, and that was shown to be absolute lies as Israel's broke peace with the United Arab Emirates, with Bahrain, with Morocco, with Sudan, and that had a potential to absolutely, totally transform the Middle East. And I think if President Trump was re-elected for a second term, we would be essentially having peace and stability in the Middle East right now, rather than all the chaos, violence and mayhem that we're seeing.
Well, as we'll come on to this, I'm sure, but one needs to look at alternative solutions in the longer term with regard to the boundaries of Israel, frankly. And there are other ideas, and one of our conservative peers, who I know well, Howard Lee, Lord Lee of Hurley, has written a great piece in the Jewish Chronicle in the last week, actually asking people to open their eyes and realise what the situation is and look at alternatives.
Absolutely.
Doesn't reach any. He makes a few suggestions. He doesn't reach a clear conclusion, because these things have to be debated. But the point is, we need to get away from this mindset of insisting on a two-state solution. It's been tried for 30 years. It's failed. What is the definition of stupidity? Just repeating, trying things that fail and fail and fail again? 30 years. Nothing's been achieved, nor will it be.
No, and this is something that needs to be addressed. I mean, if any of our viewers, and a lot of them do, write to their members of parliament and get a letter back, and it's from the Foreign Office saying that we support a two-state solution, that Israel needs to give up land for peace. Well, Israel paid a high price for pursuing that policies back in the late 90s, in the 2000s. Of course, we had the second Intifada, was absolutely horrific. And now no political party in Israel endorsing a two-state solution has actually done very well electorally for over 20 years.
Well,
so the Israelis realised that
yeah.
this doesn't work and this is dangerous and just endangers Israel's security. And yet the world needs to see that Israel is the only nation that is democratic, where there is freedom of religion, is a true functioning democracy. And if you endanger Israel's security, then that just empowers the extremists across the region, which then ultimately is a threat to the West.
You're 100% right. The interesting point you made earlier in what you were saying concerning no Israeli party properly endorses the two-state solution, or the ones who have not done well. I mean, we had the Meretz party on the left, who was a strong supporter of the two-state solution. They didn't get enough votes to get into the Israeli parliament. The Labour Party just scraped in. And don't forget, in the early years of Israel's history, Labour was the natural party of government. They ran the country for 30, 40 years, and today they got 4 seats in the Knesset out of 120. And even the Yesh Atid party, which is the more centrist political party, yes, they perhaps, some of them do support a two-state solution, but it certainly wasn't prominent in their manifesto. And what is also very interesting is if you ask Israelis, what are the issues that affect your vote, to decide how you're going to vote? And the answers you will get will be security-related issues, and violence, and the best way of whose party is best suited to stop it. They will look at the cost of living issues, which are very important in Israel at the moment. And they will look at a host of other economic, education issues. And even one issue that's bubbling under quite a bit with some Israelis is transport. Now, there's concern that the transport links across through the whole of Israel are not as good as they could be.
They're superb.
Sorry?
They're superb, especially the new train link.
Yes, but look, I'm thinking more to the south, that it could be improved, and in the north as well. And, you know, I know people who've used that issue as a factor determining how they vote. People do not say, I'm going to vote on which party is most likely to achieve a two-state solution unless they're in the small minority who back Meretz.
The other thing we have to address with this one, don't we, Gary, is the fact that if Israel had partners for peace, there would have been peace not 30 years ago, but 50 years ago.
100%.
And the fact is that the Palestinian Authority actually don't want, Mahmoud Abbas want a state, because that comes with responsibility.
Indeed.
Effectively, what they want to do is to have a terrorist entity that wants to destroy Israel through the PLO's
I couldn't agree with you. The whole purpose of having a Palestinian state is to move them forward in the ultimate destruction of Israel. Just consider the following. Let us suppose that the Palestinian state was off the table, but Israel could be divided up between Egypt, Syria and Jordan. There'd be no Israel. They'd accept that. It's not the idea of the Palestinian nationality was created by Yasser Arafat in 1964. It's not something that goes back into the depths of history. And I also think that Palestinians, or the Arabs living in Judea and Samaria, they've got one of two views. Either they're with the terrorists and they want to destroy Israel completely, but I think at least a minority, and maybe more than a minority, are actually casting envious eyes at their cousins who live west of the Green Line in Israel and who are enjoying successful lives, doing very, very well in their professions, in business, even in the army. And that is the life that many of them would like to have.
Yeah. And we also have to, I think, Gary, address the issue of internal Arab-Palestinian society and dynamics. The fact that the PLO, who came in with Yasser Arafat and became ministers, didn't come from that area. So they were kind of alien when Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat signed the Oslo Accords, which will be 30 years in September this year, came from with outside. And so therefore there was huge resentment amongst ordinary Palestinians with these members of the PLO being given huge mansions, ministerial responsibilities. They were in charge of business and took all the wealth for themselves and then have effectively ran an authoritarian regime ever since. And so there's huge resentment against them. This is why we're seeing the support for Hamas and other Palestinian terrorist organizations threaten the very democracy. So as soon as they say we're going to open up for parliamentary elections, Hamas wins. So isn't there a great danger, and this is why we need the forward thinking on the two-state solution, is that if Israel decided to make peace with Fatah and Mahmoud Abbas tomorrow, the following day we would see a Hamas government in power, and Israel would have the same security situations they face now in Gaza, but throughout Judea and Samaria, which is the biblical heartland of Israel. And this would be a huge danger for Israel's security, but also endangering Jordan as well.
You're making a very powerful case against any idea of a two-state solution. I would add to that I think that most Arabs, as far as I'm living in Judea and Samaria, don't want that either. They want, either they support the terrorists, which I'm afraid a lot of them do, or alternatively, they want to have a good quality of life, and they're looking for some kind of solution that would keep Israeli control and would give them similar, put them in a similar position to the Arab communities who live west of the Green Line. The other point to make here is that the Arabs who voted in the Israeli elections often vote on issues that are similar to Jewish concerns. The Arabs make up about 20 to 21% of the population west of the Green Line. Yet the proportion who voted for Arab parties was probably in the region of 10 or 11%, which means that quite a lot of them voted for Zionist Israeli parties. And I was stunned to hear a piece of information recently that several thousand Arab voters voted for Ben Gvir and Smotrich, the religious Zionist party. Why did they do that? They did that because security reasons. They believed that the RZP will be the best party for security issues. Incredible.
That's the first time
and not publicised much in the press, I can tell you that.
No, that's an incredible piece of information there. So let's have a look at and take ourselves back a year when US President Joe Biden visited Mahmoud Abbas and actually called for a two-state solution.
For the first time, a U.S. president visited East Jerusalem, sending a signal to Israel that part of the city could be the future capital of a Palestinian state. From there, Biden headed to Bethlehem to meet with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and advocated for a two-state solution.
Two states along the 1967 lines were mutually agreed to swaps remain the best way to achieve equal measure of security, prosperity, freedom, and democracy for the Palestinians as well as Israelis.
After Israel comes perhaps the most challenging part of his Mideast trip, the president going to Saudi Arabia, a country he once called a pariah due to its human rights record and connections to the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
My position on Khashoggi has been so clear. If anyone doesn't understand it in Saudi Arabia or anywhere else, then they haven't been around for a while.
Biden, though, made a point of wanting more positive relations with the country, even as he admits the U.S. left a vacuum in the region.
The reason I'm going to Saudi Arabia, though, is much broader, is to promote U.S. interest. Promote U.S. interest in a way that I think we have an opportunity to reassert what I think we've made a mistake of walking away from, our influence in the Middle East.
With the United States of America distances ourselves from other people and other countries that should be stronger friends and stronger allies, they go elsewhere. And when they go elsewhere, there aren't other good, friendly countries that are waiting with open arms. Saudi has an enormous amount of resources. They are an attractive prize on the world stage. So whether it's China or Russia or others, that's where they're going to run to. And therefore, it behooves us to hug them closely and to enhance the relationship with them, even if we've got challenges in that relationship. To distance them is only going to propel them towards our enemies and our foes.
On Thursday, the Israeli government approved a deal that may pave the way for relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, while Saudi Arabia also granted flyover rights to Israel. When Biden does land in Saudi Arabia, he will find a different Middle East. John Medved is the founder of Our Crowd, Israel's largest venture capital platform.
Really good news recently in this part of the world has been the Abraham Accords, which was so smartly named, because what it has resulted in is this incredible release of energy between the children of Abraham.
Medved wrote about this new Middle East on his blog on LinkedIn and says the sand curtain in the Middle East is coming down.
And when this sand curtain, which separated us from our neighbors, sort of dissipates, when this comes down, starts to come down, it's not coming back up.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
And I think we need to remind the US State Department, together with Joe Biden, that the two-state solution is not a solution. It doesn't work. And this is why, had he adopted some of President Trump's policies, we'd now be seeing a lot more peace and security in the region. And it's quite alarming, isn't it, that if we take ourselves back to 2019, 2020 era, Gary, when President Trump was in office and we had the breakout of the Abraham Accords, the Iranian regime was hanging by a thread. It was economically bankrupt because of the tough sanctions imposed upon the regime. We also saw that then Hezbollah started to run out of funding. The Palestinian Authority were completely isolated. And this was a period of kind of reasonable peace and stability in the Middle East. But after completely reversing all of President Trump's Middle Eastern foreign policy, we're seeing that the Middle East is going up in flames now. We see that Iran is now on the threshold of having the world's most dangerous weapon, a nuclear weapon. Their sponsorship for international terrorism is increasing. We're seeing that that America, instead of being the bastion of security in the Middle East and the Arab world, it has now given that over to the Chinese, and they broke an agreement between the Iranians and the Saudis, a normalization agreement, and that Israel is in a very precarious situation now because of the policies that have been carried out by the Biden administration. What are your thoughts on this very precarious security situation that Israel now finds itself in?
My first thought is I hope a Republican is elected President of the United States at the end of 2024. That's my very first thought. I would say that when Obama was president, from 2009 to 2016, Bibi Netanyahu did a very good job in minimizing the damage that Obama and his government could cause. He needs to do the same again, I would say. It's not for me to say what Bibi should do. I couldn't possibly comment, not just from the NGA's perspective, but from any perspective. I simply wouldn't know. But I think that he clearly, if someone has done well in the past, you hope they can do well in the future. And we're very dependent on the current Israeli government on coming up with the right solutions. They've got a horrible set of problems. Iran, terrorism, which is getting worse at the moment. They've also got internal economic problems, and they need to address them. Absolutely. And of course, my personal preference actually is very radical, and it's not bombing Iran. It's more radical than that. It's seeing we bring about regime change in Iran. That is the only ultimate solution, because just common sense would tell you, supposing Israel was to launch a raid on Iran and it was successful and it set them back with their nuclear program. If you keep the regime in power, 5 years from now, the same thing will have to happen again. And Israel will be much weaker in doing that because they've done it before and it won't have seemed to have worked. That's just my personal view.
No,
I think regime change is needed in Iran.
I think you're fundamentally right, and I think the majority of the Iranian people would agree with you as well, considering the protests that we've seen over the last few months, particularly last year, and this desire for change. And we got to also understand that Iran is a totalitarian regime that not only wants to destroy the nation of Israel, but effectively wants to control the whole world. And their Islamic theology, its Shia theology of bringing about the return of the 12th Imam or the Mahdi, is quite a frightening prospect that our Western leaders, including our own British government, fail to take seriously or even to acknowledge their dangerous ideology and their threat not only to the Middle East but also to Western and European security.
I agree. It's something that we all need to be worried about, the governments of the Western world especially. And the tragedy is that too many of these governments are not taking the threat seriously enough. I just think that more needs to be done, frankly.
What are your thoughts, Gary, particularly on the Biden administration, primarily because it's US foreign policy that sets the agenda, then our government will follow suit. And there seems to be a consensus view now that the Biden administration has decided to live with the fact that Iran will be a nuclear power, that they will have nuclear weapons, despite the danger this poses not only to Israel, but also the entire Middle East and also European and American security. They've got these ballistic missiles that are capable of hitting any city in Europe, possibly even the United States. They have alliances in South America, particularly with Venezuela. And this is the world's most dangerous regime, is on the brink of having the world's dangerous weapon. And we all in the Western world seem to be turning a complete blind eye to it. How do we address this issue?
I'm afraid the only way to address this issue is to replace Biden with a Republican president in what will it be 18 months from now. And I have something to disclose. I'm married to an American. I'm married to a lady from New York, and she would heartily endorse that.
Excellent. Yes, but a lot could happen between then and now, and the election stuff as well. But going back a little bit to the Jewish community, I mean, we know that the Jewish community faced big challenges when Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party, and the party being plagued with its Jew hatred was an issue that was coming up constantly, and there was that fear that if Corbyn got the keys to 10 Downing Street, that not only would this be bad news for British-Israeli relations, but there was a lot of fear that we'd see a mass exodus of the British Jewish community from this country. What are your thoughts on Keir Starmer? I know that you support the Conservative Party, so you're going to be a little bit biased. But share with us a little bit with your thoughts regarding, has the Labour Party dealt with the issue of Jew hatred within the party, both the parliamentary party and the grassroots party of the Labour Party?
I don't know enough about what's going on inside the Labour Party to be able to properly answer the question, but there's one thing I can say. If, heaven forbid, Labour win and win with a big majority, which could happen, it could be a situation where the Conservatives on the present opinion polls are down to below 100 seats, and Labour probably could be north of 500 or in the region of 500 seats. Something comes to my mind that happened many years ago that's very relevant here. There could be a lot of people elected for Labour who probably won't be expected to be elected. Are these people likely to be moderate Blairite Labour candidates, or are they likely to be hard left? And I remember a story from the year 1981. There was a man called Andrew Mackintosh. Andrew Mackintosh was leader of the Labour group on what was then called the Greater London Council. And he defeated a man called Sir Horace Cutler, the Conservative leader, in the GLC election that year. Andrew Mackintosh should have therefore been the new GLC leader, but he was stopped before he got his feet through the door by a vote taken by those elected by Labour, and he was replaced by, wait for it, Ken Livingstone. Could the same thing happen to Sir Keir Starmer if a lot of left-wingers are elected? I don't know, but it's possible.
That would be a frightening scenario, that's for sure, because you can't bring into question, has Keir Starmer actually dealt with the issue of Jew hatred? We know that he's married to a Jewish woman, and we know that he's done a lot to repair the damage that was done under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership with the Jewish community. But the fact is that questions still remain, as you say, over so many of the supporters of the Labour Party who are kind of dependent on the votes of the views of the Muslim community in this country, and they take a position where we know that they don't take a pro-Israel stance.
I think that when people come to vote at the elections, there will probably be other issues uppermost in most people's minds, irrespective of their religion or race or whatever. I don't think that is going to be decisive in voting intentions. But clearly, if a Labour government is elected, they will recognise, and it will be a joke, but they will recognise a Palestinian state, even a state where there's no peace agreement, no boundaries, just to show sympathy. Indeed, the Liberal Democrats are advocating a similar course of action. So if they have a reasonable number of MPs, they will back Labour anyway. And I think that will be very, very unfortunate. It would undermine our credibility within the Middle East.
And Gary, for our Christian viewers watching this program today, how can they reach out and support the Jewish community, particularly this time?
I would advise them to go to www.nja.org.uk and send our office a message as to what they would like to do.
Excellent. Because and does your community value that kind of Christian support?
Of course.
Yeah.
There's an actually interesting story. There was, I cannot remember which of Donald Trump's ministers said this. But what he said was that one of the problems with the Jewish community is that they're not sure who their friends and their enemies are. They think their friends are academics and universities when in fact they're their enemies. They think their enemies are fundamentalist Christians when in fact they're their friends, which I think sums it up. There are many, many Jews who understand that the Christian community are strongly supportive of Israel and strongly supportive of Jews as well. But there are some who start making ridiculous comparisons and saying, no, they're not our supporters. I believe they are. I believe the Christian community is fundamentally supporting Israel and the Jewish community. I noticed particularly we have groups, I'm sure you're familiar with them, like Christian Friends of Israel, Christians United for Israel, and a distant cousin of mine who is also a Mond on his mother's side. You might have heard of the Marquis of Reading.
Oh yes, of course, yeah.
He's actually a Mond, no, not on his mother's side, on his father's mother's side. He's a Mond, and he's distantly related to me.
That's amazing. Yeah, he's been on this programme. Right. Gary, it's been an absolute pleasure to host you on the Middle East Report today. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing with the National Jewish Assembly.
Thank you.
Pray that goes well and goes from strength to strength. And it's great to see some political muscle and action on behalf of the Jewish community. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching this programme at home. I think we have to continue to not only pray for Israel and stand with Israel, but we also need to stand with our Jewish communities living here in the UK with the rise of Jew hatred that we're seeing across the nation with an election coming up with about a year's and a half time. It's imperative that we continue to bless Israel, we bless the Jewish community, and we thank you for joining us on today's Middle East Report.